Hello everyone, we're back again with Dr. Charles Gardner. This week we're looking at active transportation, which I think is a topic that there'll be lots of interest on the part of the students, and I know it's a topic that's a real favorite of yours as well. So what does active transportation mean to you?
It means getting around with your own muscle power, essentially, by some means. And there's a range of means that you can do that. But the most common would be walking, of course, right? And that's, you know, absolutely fundamental to human beings to walk. That's what we've always done. But cycling, of course, is another great, more modern innovation that greatly augments how far you can get with your own muscles, how quickly. Basically 4 times as far, 4 times as fast, something, you know. You think a radius of how far you get when you're walking, you can extend it out much farther with the same amount of time and a similar amount of energy for cycling. And then there's others, of course, as well, like inline skating or ice skating on the Ottawa Canal. If you think about people who commute in Ottawa that way, or potentially boating, I suppose. But the key is your own muscle power, getting around.
Often people will talk about active transportation in the same way they might talk about the recreational aspects of transportation. Any comment around that, sort of the active transportation side of things versus, you know, I want to go cycling on the weekend? Does this speak to the same structure or organization for how we do active transportation, or are there any other comments or reflections you would have on that aspect of it?
That's a really good point, because for years we've been telling people you should be more physically active, right? And I think that used to mean go to the gym, or do something recreationally. And although that's really good, and I certainly support that, we just know from experience that you're not going to get the whole population doing that, right? People's lives are too compressed, or they're too busy, or they're not so inclined. And what we found through research looking around the world is the way to get a much larger proportion of the population active is to structure it into their daily lives. Actually make it part of their life to go walk, to do their shopping, or to go to work, or to go to school. Utilitarian activity is the way to get everybody active. And that really means having a community that invites it, that requires it even, that it's just easier. You live in a place that's easier to get on your bicycle or walk to meet your needs than it is to drive, right? Transit is still part of the mix, of course, right? Because every bus ride begins and ends with a walk, right? And people who use transit will get more walking into their daily lives than people who drive, right? So I see transit as certainly part of the mix as well. But you asked, what's the difference for planning for the recreational activity versus the utilitarian? I think that although there could be quite a bit of overlap between the two, if you only plan for people to have recreational trails, they're not going to use that to get to work. They're only going to use it for recreation, right? Whereas if you plan to have the means to walk or cycle to work or to shop or whatever, that too could be used for recreation, right? If you had to choose one versus the other, I would choose actually plan for the utilitarian activity.
Very good. For many years, my own personal example was that I worked with the Huron County Planning Department for many years. I would get in my car in the morning, I would drive to work, I would walk then into the office, which was, you know, close to the parking lot. So that was sort of my extent of active transportation. Subsequently, we now have a spot in Guelph where I walk to the university. It's a 35-minute walk each way. I do that as often as I can. But what it speaks to, I think, are the challenges that we face in rural and small town communities often. How do we create that space? So what do you see as some of the specific challenges that students should concern themselves with as it relates to rural and small town?
So a small town is, I think, an easier thing to speak to because in many ways it's like neighborhoods in a big city. I think you can plan in the same kind of way for completeness and compactness and connectivity. And so therefore also plan for active transportation. If you have distances that are not too great from where you live to where you need to go to meet your needs, you can then plan cycling and walking infrastructure to enable it and to make it safe, right? The more rural areas are much more difficult, I think, because it's just the population density so low. It'd be hard to plan for additional infrastructure like that. There is provincial policy about paving shoulders to enable cycling, and I think that has some potential. Certainly, I think it would be greatly enabling for cycling if you have a lot more in the way of paved shoulders. To me, it would make the difference between whether or not I would do it at all, right? Even with that, though, I think that's probably going to be in the realm of recreation. Right? The distances are so great that most people, even if they have a safe paved shoulder route, are unlikely to do that to get to school or to get to work because the distances are too great. Right?
It makes me wonder if there's an educational component to this as well, because I think of the farmer. You hear these stories, right? It's probably the worst case scenario, but somebody would get in their car, drive to the end of the laneway to get their mail, and then drive back to their house when there's ample opportunity there to walk. And I know we tend to think of active transportation from a perspective of facilities and infrastructure.
Yes.
I suspect there's also an educational component to this, perhaps, as well.
Yeah, I agree. Even if you didn't change the environment at all, promoting that this is important to your health, whether it's done through a mass media campaign or through your family physician, primary care practitioners' guidance to you, or by other means of getting that idea across, would help people take the opportunities that are actually there, right? To walk the lane, right? To choose to do that, to walk up the stairs instead of the elevator, whatever, take the opportunities that are there when they can. Maybe not to drive all the way to work, maybe drive part way, if they have a location they can park, do so and walk the rest of the distance. You can certainly do that kind of educating. I would advise that we do that kind of educating. But at the end of the day, we respond to the environment around us most of all. At the end of the day, if the environment invites us to be active and it's just easier to be active than not, then that's what we respond to. At the end of the day, if the stairwell in the building is inviting and well lit and open and attractive, and the elevator is down the hall and out of the way, then you'll get more people taking the stairs, right? And I think that kind of thing is going to remain a challenge, I would say, for people that are out in a rural location. How much can we change the environment?
I remember seeing a video, and there's a chance it was actually your presentation, I'm not sure. There was a video, it was in Sweden, I think, where they designed a set of stairs coming out of a subway as a piano, so you would step on it and you would get a note. Are you familiar with that?
I've seen that video.
Yeah, it's very cool, because again, it just goes to show if you can make active transportation fun, engaging, then people will partake in that. So the end result of that video is everybody was taking the stairs and not taking the escalator, whereas prior to that it had been the exact opposite. Kind of fun.
Or gamifying.
Successful approach to active transportation, what leads to that happening? What would you define as success, I suppose? Maybe it's obvious, but...
if I think about Barrie, where I live, there's areas of success and there are areas that have yet to be successful, right? So Barrie has a terrific waterfront, and on any day where the weather's the least bit inviting, you'll find large numbers of people down there walking mostly. There's some cycling, but mostly walking in great numbers because it's built for it. It's blue space and green space, and it's connected. It's a large stretch of unbroken waterfront trail, and has a sort of a yacht club area and a playground, and there are community events that happen, and so it's just always in demand, right? So that's an example of an environment that attracts travel, probably mostly recreational, but it's still of great value, right? I live in one of the more recently built areas, in the past 20 years anyway, and it's yet to have proper cycling infrastructure. And so I make a point of cycling to work because I'm committed to it and I enjoy it, and I've cycled the whole of my adult life and I'm not about to quit. But because it's not built for it, there's a lot of traffic and it's very uninviting, and I'm pretty well the only one out there, there are very few others there, and you've really got to be looking out for yourself. I wear a fluorescent vest and a flashing light and a flag out the side of the bike, and I'm looking everywhere all the time. And I can see why I'm the only one there. Right? Until that changes, and we've got a proper bicycle lanes, and preferably that they've got some kind of barrier to it, however flimsy, just something that makes people feel more secure. And until it is complete from one end to the other, so that you're never having to go without that, I'll be the only one there. Until that changes, you're not going to get the ridership. You have to have it there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm reflecting. As a child, I had a cousin who was killed on a highway on a bicycle, and for that reason, I think my wife and I, we were always reluctant to encourage our own kids to be on the highway. And again, that's living in the country on a farm, and it speaks to creating those safe spaces for active transportation to happen, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And sometimes active transportation happens, but more often than not, we as planners and public health officials try to bring focus to the development of an active transportation plan, and which I think is a really key component of this. And again, it speaks to that relationship between planning and public health, because I think it is one of those topics where the two professions come together really well around that. Any observations or comments?
We depend on planners to make an environment where people actually do the things we're advising. Right? We need you, and we therefore like to know how can we help you. Because from all that I've seen in my interactions with planners, they want these things too, right? And so how can we work together? How can we help to have that happen?
Are there examples of where that has happened really well, either the development of an active transportation plan or the outcome in terms of a really walkable, and again I want to bring focus on rural and small town if we can, so the planning process and a good active transportation plan, and the outcome of that in terms of a community which embodies many of the principles that we would aspire to. Any examples you can think of?
In the rural context, I can think in Simcoe, Muskoka of certain areas that are really very good. Perhaps the irony is that they came into existence before public health really got onto this, right? And maybe that's to be expected because the planning process takes time, right? It takes, really planners have to be among the most patient people, right? Because the fruits of your labor bear out over many years. And public health has only really come to this in the last 10 years. So I actually don't expect to see, there's been certain changes, road diets that I've seen, community gardens that I've seen put in place, awareness raising campaigns, communities that have gained status under the Share the Road program, right? But the very best built examples I'm aware of actually predated our involvement, right? So the Tay Shore Trail is a wonderful example of an inter-community paved rail trail that runs along Georgian Bay shores, utterly gorgeous. Runs, through a number of communities from Midland on for 16 kilometers heading towards the north, and is just so popular and so lovely. It's used locally by people just to go between communities, right? But it's also used for recreation as well, right? So it makes part of a wonderful outing, and there are efforts now to connect it further with other trails that continue on through Midland and beyond, right? And to have destinations of interest, part of a tourist experience as well, so good for economic development. So that would be one example that stands out in my mind. And then the other is the Barrie waterfront, which I mentioned already. And that came about because of a visionary thinking on the part of the city at the time, many years ago, where what had been a railway yard had become available for use of some kind, and instead of allowing it just to be bought up and made into private properties, it was retained by the city and developed into public space, and therefore the city's citizens gained recreational access to their waterfront, which is absolutely invaluable and sometimes fairly uncommon. You go to many other communities with waterfront space, and so much of it has been taken up by private use. It's
interesting that you again made a reference to economic development as part of that, which I think is is a key component, because sometimes when we're working with political officials, they like to see the big picture, which is, of course, there's lots of public health benefits to individual and broader, but there are also economic benefits that flow out of doing these services well, in terms of creating economic opportunities, and the more that we're able to sell that broad range of benefits, perhaps again the more successful we will be. I'll mention, because it's something that I've done, I did a project with the Huron County Health Unit, and in particular developed a guide to active transportation planning for small communities. And often the question is, if you're a community of 200 people, you can't afford to bring in a consultant, what do you do? And this is sort of a 10-step thing that individual communities can do, and maybe the active transportation for a little hamlet of 200 people is a crosswalk for children to be able to cross the street safely. But it just goes to speak that you have these big visions in terms of what we might do for the City of Toronto, and then there are other variations all the way down to the small little community and what we might be able to do. Anything else you'd like to offer concerning this topic?
Probably remiss in missing both Wasaga Beach and Collingwood. They're both excellent areas for cycling. They both have status under the Share the Road program, and have devoted a lot to developing infrastructure and are continuing to do so, and also have plans for revitalization of the waterfront or revitalization of the downtown. Both Collingwood, Wasaga Beach, Midland, and Penetanguishing, all those communities have plans of that nature. Yeah. So I look forward to what will come as well. Right? It's on this topic you have to take, I think, your successes and what is planned as well, because it does take time to actually to come to fruition.
Great. That's a fantastic set of comments on active transportation. And again, just thanks very much to Dr. Gardner, and we'll look forward to hearing from him some more as the semester goes along.